Today on the No Sitting on the Sideline Dad podcast, episode 14, we're talking about power connection community and being involved dad and parent. That's what my guest next on the No Sitting on the Sideline Dad podcast. Welcome to the episode of No Sitting on the Sideline Dad podcast. Hey, my name is Joel Foley. I'm a dad and a parent. I'm an adult trying to get through this crazy world. So I want to say thank you for being here. I know that dad and parent are time limited, so you choose to spend time means a lot. This is a podcast about having a conversation about being a dad and a parent, or just being an adult. Topics really being dad and a parent. This will be a weekly podcast. I want to connect you weekly and have a sense of community. I want you, as much as I talk to you, I was hoping you reach back and talk to me. There'll be interviews, topics of being a dad and a parent, a good parent, or just a parent. We're all going through the same issues. I am just like you. I love being a dad and a parent. And I know this dad stuff and parent's not easy. I am not an expert. I'm just a dad on a journey trying to take one day at a time in this crazy world. On today's podcast, my guest is Julian Caldwell, founder of GetConnectedDad.com. We talk about what he's doing over there at ConnectedDad.com and connecting other dads and parents. We also his journey as a father and how much of a role model his dad was to him. Julian brings insightful information about being a father, so let's jump right in. On today's podcast, I have an interview with Julian Caldwell. He's the founder of Get Connect Dad, a blog where dads connect and talk about different things about being a dad and traits. And you have 52 traits. There's a series of blogs about dads writing about different things and story about fatherhood. Thank you, Julian, for being on the podcast today.
Hey, Joel. It's an honor. I appreciate the time, and I know the work it takes to get a podcast out and up, and I really appreciate you sharing this time with me.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And thank you, like I said before we started recording, thank you for being patient. It's a lot of things, technical difficulty, and it's always fun. What is... I'd like to start off, what is one of your things you remember doing with your dad when you were growing up? Something special you and your dad shared?
Yeah, so I was the oldest of four kids, and my childhood was one probably much like many men that we didn't have a ton of money. We lived paycheck to paycheck. And the one thing I remember is my father, well, I'll give you two stories that kind of resonate well with me is my father would always take us bicycle riding. Now, in today's world, that means like you go out to maybe a trail that's kind of separate from the road, and you ride along a nice little path, and there's no real risk and danger. But my father, in the late 70s, early 80s, they just didn't have that kind of facility. So we would literally drive on the street, on the right hand side. And he would take us 15 and 20 miles on our bicycles when we were ages from like 6 until 10. So probably in today's world, he'd be arrested for child endangerment. But for me, those adventures were just amazing, and it was something I looked forward to, and it gave me a sense of like adventure at a young age. That's one thing. And the second thing that another great memory that kind of shaped me is that, so my father was a cross-country runner in high school. He's like number 3 in Southern California, which means that he could run forever. And he wanted us to all be runners, which entirely different story and for another podcast. But he would show up. He worked 3 o'clock to 11 o'clock every night, and then he would show up in the morning at recess at our school, and he would run every recess with all 3 of us kids at the time. So he'd run 3 miles with my sister, 3 miles with my brother, and 3 miles with me. So he'd run 9 miles a day to keep us in shape and to run with us and spend time with us. And then he'd go home and shower, and then he'd go to work. And he did that many, many days. And so for me, it was he didn't have to do that. He didn't have to show up, and he didn't have to spend that extra time training us, for lack of a better word. But I remember, like, how can you do that? You're exhausted. And now I'm a 48-year-old father of 2 young adopted boys and an older daughter, but I cannot imagine running 10 miles a day to keep my kids in shape. I can imagine driving 10 miles a day, but the running thing seems to be something I don't know if I could ever get my hands around. 2 stories. Sorry about that, Joe. A little longer than you probably expected, but
No, you're doing fine. It's fine. I want to get more of your perspective of being a dad and your relationship with your father, because it kind of, I would say, molded us. Well, we are fathers too, you know.
It does. Yeah, I'm 100%.
Look, all right, that didn't fall. I guess that's a good segue into what is how did dad get Connect Dad come about? I can't spit it out.
Yeah. So it's a 2-part story. I'll keep it short. About 10 years ago, I went through a really, really difficult time. I lost custody of my oldest daughter. I had joint custody for 11 years, and because I'm a man, in the state of Nebraska at the time, 92% of the men lose custody of their children in any kind of custody battle in the state of Nebraska, which meant that I could have saved myself $30,000 and just made a different deal, because I ended up losing custody, plus I lost $30,000 in the process, plus whatever my ex-wife spun. But for me, I'm a religious guy. Literally the moment that I got the news that I was losing my daughter she was moving away 4.5, 5 hours away, the word "Get Connect Dad" came into it was something that it was plastered across my head, not literally on my forehead, but it came across it. And I told my daughter at the time, who was 13, I says, at some point, Allie, I want to do something for fathers who that could help them become more connected to their kids. And I'm thinking "Get Connect Dad" is a really cool name. And that was about 10 years ago. And I paid like a good entrepreneur, I bought the domain 10 years ago. And I've had that domain every year. It comes up, and I paid my $12 to keep it going. And I'm on a trip away from home about 9 months ago for GE. And I'm on the airplane at 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning, which is very unusual for me to travel on the weekend because that time is pretty sacred for my family. And I started reading a book on sales enablement, which is, when you run large sales teams, you're trying to figure out how best to get the customer to move with you at the same time. And I thought literally a voice in my head said, "Julian, you're going to read another book on something that you've done for 20 years. What would happen if you spent half of that time focusing on your family, and then subsequently the families of other men and women, and it's time for you to do something?" And it was 9 months ago. I kind of sat down on the plane. I put my book away. I wrote out a long kind of dissertation about what I wanted it to do and why I wanted to do this. And 3 days later, a lady from Parent Vox emailed me and says, "I liked your post. Would you like to write something for us?" And I said, "Absolutely." And that started it, Joe. It was that simple. It was it had a couple of great early people who encouraged me, and you were one of those guys. I had a father from Colorado Springs who emailed me and says, "I'd like to write with you." And I said, "Paul, I love it." So he wrote an article. And then another father who's a construction worker from Pittsburgh, he says, "I want to write something." I thought, well, this is pretty cool. I've been keeping track of those 52 traits for a long time. And it just became a natural kind of, I call it like the bumper, like the bowling alley bumpers for podcasting, right? It kind of gives me a focus of what to focus on. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't let me, it kind of keeps me from going off, off reservation and making, just making it, I like it. It helps me remain focused.
How was like building community? Because I noticed a lot of dads are contributing to the website now, and
yeah.
How was that experience? And have they reached out to you and you communicated with them? And
yeah, great question. So when I first started, I thought it would be, I would write it. My mom would read it and said, "That's very good. I'm proud of you, son." My wife would pat me on the head and go, "That's very cute. You keep on going, Julian." And then, 10 years from now, or 15 years from now, or 25, whenever I passed, my young boys who are 5 and 3 now would look back and go, oh, this is really cool. I like what Dad did. This is kind of a nice legacy. And so interestingly enough, when I started, when the first couple of dads says I want to write, I was like, this is kind of fun. This would be neat to kind of get other dads' perspective, because I certainly don't have it all figured out. And it became an ongoing conversation. So I still look. So every day, I had 3 people sign up today. We're about 230 fathers and mothers, believe it or not, writing for a fatherhood site. I just haven't updated the website, because I was doing it every time I got new fathers. It was like 137, then the next day it was 139. So, but we're up over 200, about 225 or 230 now. We're at like 19 countries, and it's been just a blast. It's I love, I was talking to a gentleman 2 nights ago. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm finishing up editing an article, and he's from Cambodia. And so I said, I looked at his Twitter feed, looked at his blog real quick, and says, you need to write something for us. I'd love our parents to see a Cambodian perspective. And so he writes back and goes, I'm working on my own. My family is 450 miles away from me. Oh, wow. I'd love to be able to write about what I'm trying to do to still remain connected for them. So that's the sort of stuff that just makes me go, holy cow, this is awesome.
How do you reach them through social media, and how do you go about that?
So completely through social media, with the caveat that, of course I spent the $20 and got, 500 cards printed up, and I've, it always ends up, I don't know, maybe I've got just fatherhood on the mind, which is not a bad place to be, but it ends up being a conversation, a part of most every conversation with men that I meet. So if I'm on an airplane, I've had fathers who are sitting next to me, and I'm working on something, and they ask, what are you doing? So I explain, and the next thing you know, they says, well, I'd like to write something. And I tease, I've said, it's like giving away money. It's like, I'm asking you to tell me what you like about being a dad and what you want to do with your kids. It's not like I'm asking you to give me $100 bill, right? It's share with us, share with the community what you've done well, what you're learning about, and what you want to do better about. That's a kind of a nice, it's an easy sell, for lack of a better word. And I'm not selling anything, but it's just easy to get people to do that. So I reach out via social media a lot. I do a lot of phone calls. I do a lot of texting, and I do a lot of messaging on Facebook. If I will respond to any father who reaches out personally, because for me it's really about, when I use the word get connected, it's really, that's what I'm trying to do. I want to connect more dads to more resources globally.
Well, that sounds very interesting. I follow you a lot. Like I said, I'm involved in most of your groups that you're in, and I see the connection, and then how important it is, because I didn't realize how big the father community was, like fatherhood, like fathers in community. I always thought it was mom blogs, and nothing against mom blogs or anything like that, but I didn't realize the how big the dad community is.
It's shocking, Joe, isn't it? It's funny. I think I have reservations about, not the community, but I think the men who are reading and listening to podcasts typically are probably not the ones that you and I want to speak to, right? And so I spend a great deal of time in prayer and thought about how do we reach the men who wouldn't take the time to go read an article about how to encourage leadership in their kids. And I take the time, I spend a lot of time thinking about, how do we engage the fathers who have been shut out of their kids' life for whatever reasons, or even the fathers who have chosen to step out of their kids' life. How do we instill that love of being exhausted in the morning whenever you get up because your kids kept you up all night long and didn't go to bed? So that's for me. I haven't certainly cracked that nut yet, but I really hope that as this community continues to grow, we find a way to reach the men who wouldn't be in a Facebook group for fatherhood, right? They'd be the guys who we might meet down at the basketball court or on the golf course who may not have a good relationship with their kids. And those are the ones that, as I look at the next few seasons of Get Connected and what I want to do personally and professionally and spiritually, I want to really figure out how we can reach those men better.
Well, the one question I had then is, how does this come about since your relationship with your daughter? How did this come about? It seemed like you helping out other dads in their situations. Does this have something to do with the past, and is it something that you helping you out to deal with the situations in the past?
Yeah, Joe. So great, insightful question. So I think there's two phases about it. The ability to listen to men and women, men in particular, I guess in this case specifically, and the struggles that they've all had to go through with their own kids, right? In different ways. If it's estrangement, if it's parent alienation, if it's loss of custody, if it's getting custody, it's not knowing what to do with them when you've got custody. It's like, the dog doesn't know what to do whenever he catches the car, right? The wheel on the car. So how do you equip men who actually get custody now they've got 3 or 4 kids? So that's part. So being able to listen to that and articulate and hear what or have them articulate, their pains and struggles, has been very healing for me, because I did lose the last 7 years of my daughter's life in terms of having a meaningful impact in her life. And then God blessed my wife and I with the ability to adopt 2 boys, who I of course love. I joke love as much, if not more, than my daughter, because they're boys and easier right now. I'm sure it'll all change in the future, but I really want to do the second time better and the best I can, right? So those 2 factors kind of drive me to do that. So definitely a healing. There have been men that I've talked to at 1 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning because I'm editing something late, who literally, I've had guys call up out of the blue, Joe, and pray with me, which if you told me 2 years ago that I would have a strange guy from Florida call up at 1 o'clock in the morning and pray over both of our hearts, I would have told you you're smoking crack.
And that must be a good feeling to know that you're reaching out and they're reaching back and asking for help. It makes it worthwhile of what you're doing.
It does. I spend honestly 3 to 4 hours a night after my kids go to bed. As you and I were joking before we went live, that this is the most I've ever worked for free in my entire life. And you have a passion too, right? So this is something we do because you want to reach men and families just like I do, and you want to make a difference, and you want to look back and say, what did my footprint, what did my legacy look like? And this has really certainly become surprisingly a part of the definition of who Julian Caldwell will be when I pass.
I mean, I feel the same way about the podcast. I want to reach out, and one of the things I like to reach out to other dads too, and I find interesting people and trying to connect with them on Facebook and then get them on the podcast is sometimes it's just like I want to learn something, and I want to reach out because I think this person and it might be interesting in my audience. So, I want to connect. I love connecting with people because, like I said, I told you before, looking at all the states and the countries, I don't care really much about the numbers. I just want to get the little box like, hey, I got Iowa this month or this week. I got Massachusetts this week. I just want to connect. And that's really what I'm really doing for.
And I think when you're surrounded by men trying to do the right thing, it makes you a better man.
I agree. So what is a typical day in Julian's life? What is the typical, everybody has those typical mornings when it comes to dealing with the kids, getting them ready for work, and what's the biggest challenges?
So I think the biggest challenge is I'm 48 and I've got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. I think my brother-in-law, who's 49, he and my sister offered to watch my kids for the weekend for my wife's and my 10-year anniversary this year. And on Sunday, whenever we showed up to pick him up, he looked at me and says, "I have no idea how you do it." I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I'm exhausted. I'm just exhausted." And I'm sure that I'm preaching to the choir for all of the dads and families out there listening, but for me, that's one of the biggest challenges, just the energy level that 5-year-olds and 3-year-olds have. But my typical day is up around 7:30, depending upon what the day looks like. I work from home whenever I'm not traveling. At least that's been the mantra for the last few years. And then we get between 6:30 and 7, really. And then getting the kids off to school there's a great comedy act on YouTube that I watch where it's talking about getting the kids out of school, out the door. And it's truly, what shoes? Get your shoes on. It feels like I'm asking them to solve peace in the Middle East to get their shoes on. But I take the kids to school in the morning, and my wife picks them up at night. I have an office now that I'm going to actually in Omaha where I work during the day if I'm not traveling. So I take the kids to school and then head into the office and then work my day, which is always filled with either phone calls, conference calls, sales meetings. And then Lori, bless her heart, she picks them up at night. We do dinner. We spend, of course, 2 hours in between the time that we get home and bedtime's between 7 and 7:15 for them still. And then my wife and I try to have an hour and a half of. It's either we sit down and look exhausted at each other, or we try to talk. And then she goes to bed, and I typically work another 2 to 3 hours on the website, on social media. We're on every platform except Snapchat. And as you know, that could be a full-time job. So I try to keep up. I want to make sure that the connections are authentic, and I try to respond to every mention and comment. And someone told me, you'll never be able to do that once you've got over 10,000 followers on Twitter. And we were at 12,100, I think, today. And I still try to like and/or comment or reply or retweet everyone who takes the time to do something kind for me and our community. I try to reciprocate that for them, because it's what makes social media cool and awesome.
That's the way. That's the same way I like to. I'm up to over 5,000, almost 5,000 Twitter followers, and then I like to communicate. I like to find out new people, like what they're doing, and it's always and connect with them. And I try to answer as much as I can, because I remember one time I had an automatic response, and somebody called me out on it. And ever since then, I'm like, okay, I'm going to answer every single one of them. But since we're talking about what is your biggest win as a dad with your kids? Like, what is the fun thing you like to do? What is one of the things you and your boys really enjoy doing together?
Well, the biggest win is I convinced my wife to buy an RV. So that's the biggest win. The travel. So we were fortunate enough to. I grew up so poor. We would go to these fairs, and they had RV shows right at the county fair or the state fair, and we would go into these big long trailers. And it was bigger than the house I think we were living in. And my brother and I'd say, when we've made it, we're going to buy a trailer, which is kind of ironic and fun. But about 2 years ago, I told my wife before we got married, I said, here's one thing. As soon as we're at a point where we can afford it financially, I'd like to purchase a travel trailer or an RV. And she just kind of did the pat on the head. You're so cute, Julian. You bet. That sounds like a lot of fun. And then, we all have had that pat on the head. But about 2 years ago, 2 years ago, we went every year. She would let me go to the RV show, right? The local RV show. And my boys, who at the time were 3 and 1, they fell in love with it. Climb into the thing. This is my bed. So we did. I think we were in like 300 RVs in a day.
Wow.
Travel trailers. And then my wife, we found one we loved, and I said, well, I told her that it was kind of a 5-year plan, and she went back and she said, let's just go buy it. So we bought a travel trailer, and then as she reminded me, every time that I would be having wine with my mother and father-in-law, I'd say, hey, if we ever buy a trailer, I'm going to buy one for you. She says, that you don't have to, but we did tell mom and dad that we would buy them one. So we were fortunate enough we were able to go get a second trailer.
Oh, wow.
And so we have it's like it's everywhere we go, they go. So it's a long answer to a very simple question. What do you do for fun? What's the big win? We camp every summer. We try to go as many times as we possibly can. The boys cannot wait to go. It's something we look forward to, and it's about getting out. It's about getting outside, which is one of the core things that we as a family try to do. It's tough to do that in Nebraska or in Iowa because it's so cold, but in the spring and summertime, we're all over it, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we do. It's the biggest win. It was as I joke, it's the best investment we've ever made. My mother and father-in-law come with us, so they get completely uninterrupted time with grandma and grandpa, and it's helped our family become closer and more slow down some, right?
Exactly. It sounds like getting outdoors, especially camping. Me and my family, we've gone a few years to I live in New Hampshire, but Western Mass, and we stayed out there, and I mean literally no cell signal. It's like detox for cell phones. There's no cell phone, no internet. You're like, I can't tweet. But it's so inspiring too, in the sense that you get to spend time. Even though I've never seemed to be able to get the fish hook right or put on the thread correctly, but you know what? It doesn't really matter. It's just spending quality time with my son.
Completely agree.
One other thing I'd like to talk about, I guess, in something that's coming up, and I know that you and we talked about before a little bit about an upcoming podcast that you were talking about. I don't know if you want to talk a little about that.
Yeah. So Mike Farrell, who's the director for fatherville.com, he reached out in December and said, "Hey, Julian, I think this would be awesome. I've always wanted to do this. Fatherville.com has wanted to do that, and none of the men on the board of directors were interested in doing it with him. So he called and reached out to me, and we of course wanted. I'm very ambitious. Mike's very ambitious. He said we're going to have one out on January 15th. But you know the thing that we're trying to do is we want to do it right, and take the right time to get the right content and the right audience. So we've started a Twitter account out there. So we're starting to build that. It's called the Deliberate Dad Show, and it's going to be twofold. We're going to talk about the Fatherville has an incredible kind of how to be a dad the first year and a half. That Mike and some of that group wrote, and I just love it. And it's kind of bare essentials, from diapering to things that you need to be concerned about, things to watch for, etc. But just so we're going to do some of that content as a way for new fathers to kind of follow along, and then we're going to do some of the content from the Get Connect ads. So some of the writings that the parents have shared and that I write about. So we're going to take some of those, kind of like the top 10 or top 12 and do those. And then we'll have a story, like the Father of the Week kind of thing. We'll probably, Father of the Week, no, we'll pick some guy randomly, say, congratulations, you're the Father of the Week. But like online father, what's someone doing crazily interesting? That's not a word, but that we would like to share with the rest of the viewers. So we're right now working on just building out the social media presence, and we'll launch that hopefully here in February. But I'd rather launch it right versus trying to stumble out there and getting it messing it up. But I'm excited to work with Mike. Mike's a great guy. Loves his kids. He's in a different season. His kids are older, like my oldest daughter. So it's going to be fun because I'll be I'm the old guy with young kids, and he'll be the guy my age saying, "Oh, I don't have that problem anymore." That's really, I'm sorry, I don't have that problem anymore. And then I'm working on another project, just trying to looking a couple of partners around some education for fathers, and delivering that in a method that's easy and bite-sized and consumable, right? So that if you're a busy dad, you don't have 45 minutes a day to read 75 blogs about what I should do. And even in many cases, I've asked some of the dads, what would you do in a day? So I've got about 15 minutes that I would devote to kind of sharpening my saw. And so I'm trying to figure out how to encapsulate bite-sized pieces of advice and guidance and leadership for fathers that we can deploy here in the next 6 or 7 months, and then make those available as a gift to fathers who would never be on social media, but might subscribe to a free text message once a day that gives them a 15 minutes of something to do. So
that sounds like a very interesting. I'm looking forward to listening and listening to the content. That sounds very. I'm very excited about it, actually.
Thanks.
And any final thoughts? We'll wrap it up. Any final thoughts? And where dads and parents can reach out to you and find you?
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for taking the time. I know, again, it's a lot of work to put a show together, and I know that being in the business with you, I understand how coordinating schedules and taking time away from your family, which is valuable, is always tough. So thank you very much. I think the best way to find me would be on Twitter. It's just at GetConnectDad. So it's like Get Connected with a DAD at the end, or Instagram, which is GetConnectDad, or Pinterest, which is GetConnectDad, or the website, which is getconnectdad.com. And so those are kind of the four main ways. You're welcome to email me directly if you have a question or a thought. I'm always looking for good ideas, and people are interested in writing. And you just email me at juliancaldwell@gmail.com. So it's JulianCaldwell@gmail.com. Always looking for thoughts, feedback, especially feedback for the website, things we could do to make it better. It's a labor of love, but everyone's baby is pretty, right? So it's important to have someone look and go, my goodness, that kid needs some hair. So I'm okay with that. And then I guess the last advice I would just ask the dads to think about, doing those things that they might sound old-timey, but at the end of the day, they're things that really make a lot of sense for kids. And the biggest one is, make sure that we say, I love you, and hug them consistently. And I know that everyone says I do it all the time, but life gets busy, and sometimes we just forget to even take that time. The second thing I would say is, if you believe in faith of some type, to make sure you engage your family in that faith and make it a part of your weekly process. And there's something valuable to me in my life about kind of settling up weekly on kind of the path forward, and kind of putting myself in the right frame of mind about what my responsibilities are as a father for my family and a leader for my family. Third thing is, devote 1 hour a week specifically to each kid doing something that they want to do. And it's best if you kind of break it up over the week. So 15 minutes a day. Doesn't sound like a lot of time, but for a child, statistically, and I mean, just from an experience perspective, and even there's some research that just 15 minutes, letting your child play Legos and you playing with him or her, gives them a great sense of connection and belonging into the family. So taking 15 minutes, if you've got 4 kids, that's it's an hour a day, but that would go a long way to continuing building that relationship with your kids. Reading to your kids, and then taking a walk. Or getting outside. So those are the kind of, we've called our 5 habits. So live your faith, devote an hour to each kid, read a story, take a walk, and get outside, and then say I love you and hug your kids. So those are the 5 things I'd like to leave your listeners with. Is just think about those. Those are not. They should be no-brainers, right? They should be simple, straightforward things. But you'd be surprised how many people don't really do them.
I mean, it sounds like your father left a good impression on you. In a sense, and it sounds like a lot of it when you talked about in the beginning of the podcast about the running and going to run, and it sounds like he left a good impression and left a good example.
Well, it's very kind, Joe. I do. I've had lots of men in my life as role models, but my dad was definitely one that his sacrifices for our children, for my brothers and sisters, and what he did is certainly an example that I want to leave and live for my kids.
Well, thank you very much, Julian, for being on the podcast today, and I really do appreciate it.
Joe, you're awesome. Appreciate what you do, man.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Well, that's all for this episode. I want to thank you for joining me on the No Sitting on the Sideline Dad podcast. And also I want to thank my guest, Julian Caldwell, for being a guest on the podcast. You can find more about Julian over at getconnecteddad.com. You can also find all the social links to get in touch with Julian at getconnecteddad.com/community. You can find the show notes for the podcast over at nosittingonthesideline.com. Please comment on the podcast. All comments help improve the show. Please keep it constructive because we learn together. I learn to bring you better content. You can find my email also at nosittingonthesideline.com/contacts. You'll find all my social media links, email, Twitter, Facebook, or if you want to leave a message on the speed pipe right in the right-hand corner, I'll leave a message. Until next time, have fun, get involved with your children, give them a hug, tell them you love them, because just a few minutes a day really makes a difference. Until next time, God bless, take care, see ya.